Okay, now on a somewhat different subject, I'm going to be reading from the Notes on the State of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson. Let me see here. There's just some excerpts from the Notes on the State of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson, which I find to be particularly relevant in some cases, or simply revealing of how Thomas Jefferson actually thought. Of course, with him being one of our founding fathers, it is important to know how this man thought. He was a critical figure in our history, and obviously we wouldn't be quite the same country that we are without Thomas Jefferson. I'll read out, for example, part of section 4 on query number 13 regarding the Constitution of the state and its several characters. All the powers of government, legislative, executive, and judiciary, result to the legislative body. Concentrating these in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. It will be no alleviation that these powers will be exercised by the plurality of hands and not by a single one. 173 despots would surely be as oppressive as one. Let those who doubt it turn their eyes on the Republic of Venice. As little will it avail us that they are chosen by ourselves. An elective despotism was not the government we fought for, but one which should not only be founded on free principles, but in which the powers of government should be so divided and balanced among several bodies of the magistracy as that no one could transcend their legal limits without being effectually checked and restrained by the others. For this reason, that convention which passed the ordinance of government laid its foundation on this basis that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments should be separate and distinct, so that no person should exercise the power of more than one of them at the same time. But no barrier was provided between these several powers. The judiciary and executive members were left dependent on the legislative for their subsistence in office, and some of them for their continuance in it. If, therefore, the legislature assumes executive and judiciary powers, no opposition is likely to be made, nor, if made, can it be effectual, because in that case they may put their proceedings into the form of an act of assembly, which will render them obligatory on the other branches. They have, accordingly, in many instances, decided rights which should have been left to judiciary controversy, and the direction of the executive during the whole time of their session is becoming habitual and familiar, and this is done with no ill intention. The views of the present members are perfectly upright. When they are led out of the regular province, it is by art in others and inadvertence in themselves, and this will probably be the case for some time to come, but it will not be a very long time. Mankind soon learn to make interested uses of every right and power which they possess or may assume. The public money and public liberty, intended to have been deposited with 3 branches of magistracy, but found inadvertently to be in the hands of one only, will soon be discovered to be sources of wealth and dominion to those who hold them. Distinguished, then, too, by this tempting circumstance, that they are the instrument as well as the object of acquisition. With money we will get men, said Caesar, and with men we will get money. Nor should our assembly be deluded by the integrity of their own purposes, and conclude that these unlimited powers will never be abused, because they themselves are not disposed to abuse them. They should look forward to a time, and that not a distant one, when a corruption in this, as in the country from which we are derived our origin, will have seized the heads of government, and will be spread by them through the body of the people, when they will purchase the voices of the people and make them pay the price. Human nature is the same on every side of the Atlantic, and will be alike influenced by the same causes. The time to guard against corruption and tyranny is before they shall have gotten hold of us. It is better to keep the wolf out of the fold than to trust by drawing his teeth and talons after he shall have entered. To render these considerations and the more cogent, we must observe in addition, and it goes into number 5, that the ordinary legislature may alter the Constitution itself. On the discontinuance of assemblies, became necessary to substitute in their place some other body competent to the ordinary business of government, and to the calling forth the powers of the state for the maintenance of our opposition to Great Britain. Conventions were therefore introduced, consisting of 2 delegates from each county, meeting together and forming one house on the plan of the former House of Burgesses, to whose places they succeeded. They were first chosen anew for every particular session, but in March 1775 they recommended to the people to choose a convention which should continue in office a year. This was done accordingly in April 1775, and in the July following, that convention passed an ordinance for the election of delegates in the month of April annually. It is well known that in July 1775, a separation from Great Britain and establishment of a republican government had never yet entered in any person's mind. A convention, therefore, chosen under that ordinance cannot be said to have been chosen for the purposes which certainly did not exist in the minds of those who passed it. Under this ordinance, at the annual election in April 1776, a convention for the year was chosen. Independence and the establishment of a new form of government were not yet the objects of the people at large. One extract from the pamphlet called Common Sense had appeared in the Virginia papers in February, and copies of the pamphlet itself had gotten in a few hands, but the idea had not been open to the mass of the people in April, much less can it be said that they had made up their minds in its favor. So that the electors of April 1776, no more than the legislators of July 1775, not thinking of independence and a permanent republic, could not mean to vest in these delegates powers of establishing them or any other authorities other than those of the ordinary legislature. So far as a temporary organization of government was necessary to render our opposition energetic, so far their organization was valid. But they received in their creation no power but what were given to every legislature before and since. They could not, therefore, pass an act transcendent to the powers of other legislatures. If the present assembly pass an act and declare it shall be irrevocable by subsequent assemblies, the declaration is merely void, and the act repealable as other acts are. So far, and no farther authorized, they organize the government by the ordinance entitled a constitution or form of government. It pretends to no higher authority than the other ordinances of the same session. It does not say that it shall be perpetual, that it shall be unalterable by other legislatures, that it shall be transcended above the powers of those who they knew would have equal power with themselves. Not only the silence of the instrument is a proof that they thought it would be alterable, but their own practice also. For this very convention, meeting as a House of Delegates in General Assembly with the Senate in the autumn of that year, passed acts of assembly in contradiction to their ordinance of government, and every assembly from that time to this has done the same. I am safe, therefore, in the position that the Constitution itself is alterable by the ordinary legislature. Though this opinion seems founded in the first elements of common sense, yet is the contrary maintained by some persons, because, say they, conventions were invested with every power necessary to make effectual opposition to Great Britain. But to complete this argument, they must go on to say further that effectual opposition to Great Britain could not be made without establishing a form of government perpetual and unalterable by the legislature. Which is not true. An opposition which at some time or another was to come to an end could not need a perpetual institution to carry it on, and a government amendable as its defects should be discovered was as likely to make effectual resistance as one that should be unalterably wrong. Besides, the assemblies were as much invested with all powers requisite for resistance as the conventions were. If, therefore, these powers included that of modeling the form of government in the one case, they did so in the other. The assemblies, then, as well as the conventions, may model the government. That is, they may alter the ordinance of government. They urge that if the convention had meant for this instrument should be alterable, as their other ordinances were, they would have called it an ordinance, but they have called it a constitution, which ex vi termini means an act above the power of the ordinary legislature. I answer that constitutio, constitutionum, statutum, lexitum are controvertible terms. Constitutio dictator jus quod a principe conditor. Constitution quod ab imperatoribus rescriptum statutum vi est statutum idem quod lex Calvini lexicum juridicum. Constitution and legislature were originally terms of the civil law, and from thence introduced by ecclesiastics into the English law. Thus, in the statute 25 hen dot 8th C19, I don't know what the symbol is exactly, dot 1, constitutions and ordinances are used as synonymous. The term constitution has many other significations in physics and politics, but in jurisprudence, whenever it is applied to any act of the legislature, it invariably means a statute, law, or ordinance, which is the present case. No inference, then, of a different meaning can be drawn from the adoption of this title. On the contrary, we might conclude that by their affixing to it a term synonymous with the ordinance or statute. But of what consequence is their meaning where their power is denied? If they meant to do more than they had power to do, did this give them power? It is not the name, but the authority is not the thing, but the authority, which means there's an act obligatory. Lord Coke says, quote, an act of a statute, an article of the statute, 11R.2.C.5, that no person should attempt to revoke any ordinance then made is repealed. For that such restraint is against the jurisdiction and power of the Parliament. 4.inst.42. And again, though divers parliaments have attempted to restrain subsequent parliaments, yet never could they effect it. For the latter parliament hath ever power to abrogate, suspend, qualify, explain, or make void the former in the whole or in any part thereof, notwithstanding any words of restraint, prohibition, or penalty in the former. For it is the maxim in law the laws of Parliament, quod legis posterioris prioris contrarius abrogant. 4.43. To get rid of the magic supposed to be in the word constitution, let us translate it into its definition as given by those who think it above the power of the law. And let us suppose the convention, instead of saying we, the ordinary legislature, had established a constitution, had said we, the ordinary legislature, established an act above the power of the ordinary legislature. Does this not expose the absurdity of the attempt? But say they, the people have acquiesced, and this has given it an authority superior to the laws. It is true that the people did not rebel against it, and was that a time for people to rise in rebellion? For the people to rise in rebellion? Should a prudent acquiescence at a critical time be construed into a confirmation of every illegal thing during that period? Besides, why should they rebel? At an annual election, they had chosen delegates for the year to exercise the ordinary powers of legislation and to manage the great contest in which they were engaged. These delegates thought the contest would be best managed by an organized government. They therefore, among others, passed an ordinance of government. They did not presume to call it perpetual or unalterable. They well knew that they had no power to make it so, that our choice of them had been for no such purpose, and at a time when we could have no such purpose in contemplation. Had an unalterable form of government been meditated, perhaps we should have chosen a different set of people. There was their cause there then for the people to rise in rebellion. But to which dangerous lengths will this argument lead? Did the acquisitions of the colonies under the various acts of power exercised by Great Britain in our infant state confirm these acts and so far invest them with the authority of the people as to render them unalterable and our present resistance wrong? On every unauthoritative exercise of power by the legislature must the people rise in rebellion, or their silence be construed into a surrender of that power by them? If so, how many rebellions should we have had already? One certainly for every session of assembly. The other states in the Union have been of the opinion that to render a government unalterable by ordinary acts of assembly, the people must delegate persons with certain special powers. They have accordingly chosen special conventions to form and fix their governments. The individuals, then, who can maintain the contrary opinion in this country should have the modesty to suppose it possible that they may be wrong and the rest of America right. But if there be only a possibility of their being wrong, if only a plausible doubt remains of the validity of the ordinance of government, is it not better to remove that doubt by placing it on a bottom which none shall dispute? If they be right, we shall only have the unnecessary trouble of meeting once in convention. If they be wrong, they expose us to the hazard of having no fundamental rights at all. True it is, this is no time for deliberating on forms of government. While an enemy is within our bowels, our first object is to expel him. But when this shall be done, when peace shall be established, and leisure given us for entrenching within good forms the rights for which we have bled, let no man be found indolent enough to decline a little more trouble for placing them beyond the reach of question. If anything more requisite to produce convention of the expediency of calling a convention at a proper season to fix our form of government, let it be the reflection. Now, was going basically more or less along the lines of arguing, and he does in a convincing, I think, manner, that the powers awarded the assembly at the time, or the convention, was never intended to be powers to give it a means of just drafting a permanent constitution that could not be repealed or altered. Okay, where were we? I will proceed further down the line. I don't want to go too far in matters off base, or the particulars of so many different parts of his argument. Get too sidetracked from some principal points that he's making here. The first point, as I was reflecting, was more or less along the lines that this system has some defects, and that it is alterable. This was basically saying that it was never in the intention of the electorate or the intention of the the convention when it was first formed to establish an unalterable constitution. At the time, nothing could have been further from their minds. They had other business to which to attend, such as the revolution. Okay, so let me continue with another part here. In enumerating the defects of the Constitution, it would be wrong to count among them what is only the error of particular persons. In December 1776, our circumstances being much distressed, it was proposed in the House of Delegates to create a dictator, invested with every power legislative, executive, and judiciary, civil and military, of life and of death, over our persons and over our properties. And in June 1781, again under calamity, the same proposition was repeated, and wanted only a few votes only of being passed. So this came very close to being enacted, especially at least the second time around, it came very close to being enacted, which is significant. So it shows there is always the temptation, whenever there is a great period of danger or emergency, even in a period like this, of resorting to a dictatorship in the name of resolving the emergency. This is a point that has been made more than once in history. There's that temptation. It's one of the biggest temptations in a time of hardship, is to simply enact extraordinary powers and empower someone to behave in an authoritarian manner. One who entered into this contest from a pure love of liberty and a sense of injured rights, who determined to make every sacrifice and to meet every danger for the re-establishment of those rights on a firm basis, who did not mean to expend his blood and substance with a wretched purpose of changing this matter for that, but to place the powers of government governing him in a plurality of hands of his own choice, so that the corrupt will of no man might in future repress him, must stand confounded and dismayed when he is told that a considerable portion of that plurality had meditated the surrender of them into a single hand, and in lieu of a limited monarchy, to deliver him to a despotic one. How must we find his efforts and sacrifices abused and baffled, if he may still by a single vote be laid prostrate at the feet of one man? In God's name, from whence have they derived this power? Is it from our ancient laws? None such can be produced. Is it from any principle in our new Constitution, expressed or implied? Every lineament expressed or implied is in full opposition to it. Its fundamental principle is that the state shall be governed as a commonwealth. It provides a republican organization, prescribes under the name of prerogative, the exercise of all powers undefined by the laws, places on this basis the whole system of our laws, and by consolidating them together chooses that they should be left off to stand or fall together, never providing for any circumstances nor admitting that such could arise wherein either should be suspended, no, not for a moment. Our ancient laws expressly declare that those who are but delegates themselves shall not delegate to others powers which require judgment and integrity in their exercise. Or was this proposition moved on a supposed right in the movers of abandoning their post in a moment of distress? The same laws which forbid abandonment of the post even in ordinary occasions, and much more transfer of power in other hands and other forms without consulting the people. They never admit the idea that these, like sheep or cattle, may be given from hand to hand without appeal to their own will. Was it from the necessity of the case? Necessities which dissolve a government do not convey its authority to an oligarchy or a monarchy. They throw back into the hands of the people the powers that they have delegated, and leave them as individuals to shift for themselves. A leader may offer, but not impose himself, nor be imposed on them. Much less can their necks be submitted to his sword, their breath to be held as his will or caprice. The necessity which should operate these tremendous effects should at least be palpable and irresistible. Yet in both instances where it was feared or pretended with us, it was belied by the event. It was belied, too, by the preceding experience of our sister states, several of whom had grappled through greater difficulties without abandoning their forms of government. When the proposition was first made, Massachusetts have found even the government of committees sufficient to carry them through an invasion. But we, at the time of that proposition, were under no invasion. When the second was made, there have been added to this example those of Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, in all which the Republican form has been found equal to the task of carrying them through the severest trials. In this state alone did there exist so little virtue that fear was to be fixed in the hearts of the people and to become the motive of their exertions. Did there exist so little virtue that fear was to be fixed in the hearts of the people and become the motive of their exertions and the principle of their government? The very thought alone was treason against the people, was treason against mankind in general, as riveting forever the chains which bow down their necks, by giving to their oppressors a proof which they would have trumpeted through the universe of the imbecility of Republican government in times of pressing danger to shield them from harm. Those who assume the right of giving away the reins of government in any case must be sure that the herd, on whom they hand on to the rods and hatchet of the dictator, will lay their hands on the block when he shall nod to them. But if our assemblies suppose such a recognition in the people, I hope they mistook their character. I am of the opinion that the government, instead of being braced or invigorated for greater exertions under their difficulties, would have been thrown back upon the bungling machinery of county committees for administration, till a convention could have been called and its wheels again set into motion. What a cruel moment was this for creating such an embarrassment, for putting to the proof the attachment of our countrymen to Republican government. Those who meant well, of the advocates of this measure, and most of them meant well, for I know them personally, and meant their fellow laborer in the common cause, and often proved the purity of their principles. I have been seduced in their judgment by the example of an ancient republic whose constitution and circumstances were fundamentally different. They had sought this precedent in the history of Rome, where alone it was to be found, and where at length, too, it had proved fatal. They had taken it from a republic rent by the most bitter factions and tumults, where the government was a heavy-handed, unfeeling aristocracy over a people ferocious and rendered desperate by poverty and wretchedness. Tumults which could not be allayed under the most trying circumstances, but by the omnipotent hand of a single despot. Their constitution therefore allowed a temporary tyrant to be erected under the name of a dictator, and the temporary tyrant, after a few examples, became perpetual. They misapplied this precedent to a people mild in their patriot and patient under their trial, united for the public liberty, and affectionate to their leaders. But if from the constitution of the Roman government there resulted to their Senate a power of submitting all their rights to the will of one man, does it follow that the Assembly of Virginia have the same authority? What clause in our Constitution has been substituted that of Rome by way of residuary provision for all cases not otherwise provided for? Or if they may step ad libitum into any other form of government for precedents to rule us by, for what oppression may not an precedent be found in this world of the Balaam omnia in omnia? Searching for the foundations of this proposition, I can find none which may pretend a color of right or reason, but that defect which before developed, that there being no barrier between the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments, the legislature may seize the whole, that having seized it and possessing a right to fix their own quorum, they may reduce that quorum to one, whom they call a chairman, speaker, dictator, or by any other name they please. Our situation is indeed perilous, and I hope my countrymen will be sensible of it, and apply at a proper season the proper remedy, which is a convention to fix the Constitution, to amend its defects, to bind up the several branches of government by certain laws, which when they transgress their acts shall become nullities, to render unnecessary an appeal to the people, or in other words a rebellion, on every infraction of their rights, on the peril that their acquiescence shall be construed into an intention to surrender those rights. Wow, he certainly has something to say about that. And it's significant that he is making the point that other colonies were able to, in fact, handle the situation without any recourse to a dictator. So you see with him, he's also making more generally the point that there is a great danger in assigning and concentrating to a single branch the effective power. Even if you nominally have separate branches, if you give that much power to the legislature, it was able to override the power of the executive and the judiciary in this case, you are creating the danger that it can, in fact, pretty much pass whatever law it wants, and in effect do a number of illegal and unconstitutional things, including the appointment of a dictator. So, let's continue. Move on to another passage in this, the notes on the state of Virginia. I will not get into the subject of slavery. Unfortunately, Thomas Jefferson has some views on that subject, which personally I find repugnant and disgusting. And the fact that it was done by expressed by Thomas Jefferson, is all the more disappointing, shocking, and disconcerting, to say the least. Even so, I am in no mood, particularly at this time, to be getting into the subject of Thomas Jefferson's rather unfortunate beliefs on the subject of slaves, blacks, and things of that nature, matter of race, views which, obviously are at odds with the rest of his views and reflect a kind of cognitive dissonance of sorts. The same man who can say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, could then turn around and make statements of the sort that he makes about other races and about the issue of slavery. So we'll move on to query number 17, related to religion, which I find particularly interesting, and on which subject I think is, quite frankly, a lot more palatable as far as his views are concerned. But our rulers can, I'm quoting him, part where I underlined here, but our rulers can have no authority over such natural rights only as we have submitted to them. The rights of conscience we never submitted, we could not submit. We are answerable for them to our God. The legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only as are injurious to others. But it does me no injury for my neighbor to say that there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. If it be said his testimony in a court of justice cannot be relied on, reject it then, and be the stigma on him. Constraint may make him worse by making him a hypocrite, but it will never make him a truer man. It may fix him obstinately in his errors, but it will not cure them. Reason and free inquiry are the only effectual agents against error. Give the loose to them, they will support the true religion by bringing every false one to their tribunal, to the test of their investigation. They are the natural enemies of error, and of error only. Had not the Roman government permitted free inquiry, Christianity could never have been introduced. Had not free inquiry been indulged at the era of the Reformation, the corruptions of Christianity could not have been purged away. If it be restrained now, the present corruptions will be protected and new ones encouraged. Was the government to prescribe to us our medicine and diet? I wonder if what he would say if he saw Mayor Bloomberg these days. Our bodies would be in such keeping as our souls are now. Thus, in France, the emetic was once forbidden as a medicine, and the potato was an article of food. Much to the detriment of the French, to say the least. Particularly where the potato is concerned. Their dependence on wheat, history has shown where that led. Government is just as infallible, too, when it fixes systems in physics. In other words, he's being a little sarcastic here. Galileo was sent to the Inquisition for affirming that the Earth was a sphere. The government had declared it to be as flat as a trencher, and Galileo was obliged to abjure his error. Well, actually, here Jefferson makes an error, because what Galileo was sent to the Inquisition for was a couple of things, one of which was asserting that the Earth revolved around the sun, and another, of course, for presenting his views in such a manner as to bring the church into seeming ridicule. And on the former subject, the matter of the Earth revolving around the sun, of course, he was absolutely right, and he was only upholding the Copernican model, which previously the church had no apparent difficulty with, but for some reason, by Galileo's time, it had hardened its attitude on that subject. And I might note there's still some legends that he muttered under his breath, "Nevertheless, the earth does move." Also, another thing that he got in trouble for was using his telescope to demonstrate that the moon, for example, was not smooth, that there were caves or valleys or things of that nature, mountains on the moon, things that were not apparent to the naked eye, but if you had a telescope, such as he had at the time, you could discover them. Anyway, I shall continue, ignoring Jefferson's historical factual error here, which is somewhat humorous considering it was Jefferson, but people can make mistakes, just as he was wrong about the issue of slavery and race. This error, however, at length prevailed. The earth became a globe, and Descartes declared it was whirled around its axis by a vortex. The government in which he lived was wise enough to see that this was no question of civil jurisdiction, or else we should have all been involved by authority in vortices. In fact, the vortices would have exploded, and by the Newtonian principle of gravitation, is now more firmly established on the basis of reason than it would be were the government to step in and make it an article of necessary faith. Reason of an experiment have been indulged, and error has fled before them. It is error alone which needs the support of government. Truth can stand by itself. Subjective opinion to coercion. Whom will you make your inquisitors? Fallible men governed by bad passions, by private as well as public reasons. And why subjected to coercion? To produce uniformity. But is uniformity of opinion desirable? No more than of face and stature. Introduce the bed of Procrustes, then, and as there is danger that the large men may beat the small, make us all of a size by lumping the former and stretching the latter. Difference of opinion is advantageous in religion. The several sects perform the office of a censor morum over such other. Is uniformity attainable? Millions of innocent men, women, and children, since the introduction of Christianity, have been burned, tortured, fined, imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity. What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half the world fools and the other half hypocrites. To support roguery and error all over the earth. Let us reflect that it is inhabited by 1,000 millions of people. That these profess probably 1,000 different systems of religion. That ours is but one of that 1,000. That if there be but one right, and ours that one, we should wish to see the 999 wandering sects gathered in the fold of truth. But against such a majority, we cannot effect this by force. Reason and persuasion are the only practicable instruments. To make way for these, free inquiry must be indulged. And how can we wish others to indulge it while we refuse it ourselves? But every state, says an inquisitor, has established some religion. No two, say I, have established the same. Is this a proof of the infallibility of establishments? Our sister states of Pennsylvania and New York, however, have long subsisted without any establishment at all. The experiment was new and doubtful when they made it. It is answered beyond conception. They flourished infinitely. Religion is well supported of various kinds, indeed, but all good enough, all sufficient to produce peace and order, or if a sect arises whose tenets would subvert morals, good sense has fair play, and reasons and laughs and out of doors without suffering the state to be troubled with it. They do not hang more malefactors than we do. They are not more disturbed with religious dissensions. On the contrary, their harmony is unparalleled and can be ascribed to nothing but their unbounded tolerance. because there is no other circumstances in which they differ from every nation on earth. They have made the happy discovery that the way to silence religious disputes is to take no notice of them. Let us too give this experiment fair play and get rid, while we may, of these tyrannical laws. So he makes the point here, essentially, that a true religion has nothing to fear from the truth. It has nothing to fear from fact, from scientific inquiry, the scientific method, from logic, from any type of, discovery. The ones who have something to hide, the ones who have secrets and have skeletons in their closet, who have lies that form the basis of that religious belief, are the ones who would naturally most rely upon the government to support them. The ones who would find it necessary to have the state coerce people. Why? Well, let's look at what happens. If the state does not coerce people, then therefore they're sooner or later discovered to be a false religion, and therefore eventually they begin to lose support. They fear the truth, therefore they resort to force. They do not answer truth. They do not answer, reason with reason. They have no truth behind what they're saying, so they resort to coercion. And he's saying also that, of course, it's not the proper place of government to do any such things, to enforce a particular religion. Where it's happened that there's been no enforcement of a particular religion, people have prospered a lot more, and things have been more harmonious and happy and so forth. And he makes the point that essentially the only result, really, of such coercion is to make half the world fools, as he says, and the other half hypocrites. In other words, okay, if all I have to do to survive is change religions, and I don't really agree with the religion to which I'm converting, I'm being forced in the position of basically choosing between my life and being, on the one hand, and being a sort of religious hypocrite. So you lose your life on the one hand, or you can be a religious hypocrite. And, like it or not, this has happened through history. You had cases of in Spain where Jews and Muslims have converted to Catholicism, not because they actually believed in Catholicism. No, by any means. In fact, there were many of what were called Moranos and Morosco. I don't think I'm pronouncing the second term correctly, so we'll leave that issue off. But that terminology off for now. But Moranos were basically secret Jews. They were Spanish Jews who feigned conversion to Catholicism in order to survive and prosper, and they would practice Judaism secretly while formally and publicly embracing Catholicism. So you had an example right there of what Jefferson was talking about. You have people who are being hypocrites. And, of course, other people are, they're buying into the state religion, whatever it is, and where it's wrong, they're essentially embracing folly because they're embracing the wrong-headedness of that particular religion. I won't go into the details as to what religion I'm talking about, other than I will say one thing. It's an interesting historical fact that there is a questionable basis for the Supremacy Act and the Act of Succession that was enacted by Parliament under Henry VIII. And essentially, if you really follow the logic behind Henry VIII's position, it's questionable to say the least. So in a sense, you could be embracing a form of folly there by embracing false and convoluted logic that was used to justify his annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. The position that he takes, if you look at the actual text of the books of the first 5 books of the Bible, if you look at the actual text, for example, of Deuteronomy, you will find that he is his interpretation of a certain passage in Leviticus is actually refuted by that. And his logic is rather convoluted and questionable anyway, basically more along the lines of him having supposedly taken his brother's wife, even though his brother was already dead. So there's an example. You have a rather questionable claim being asserted, and people were expected to swear to this act of supremacy and the act of succession, swear that they uphold it, swear that they believe in it, and many people who did not actually believe it still swore. They still took the oath of succession, because the alternative is lose your head. And that was not a joke, as Sir Thomas More certainly found out. So that's just an example. Oh, by the way, of course, point out the same term, Sir Thomas More, who was in many cases Lionized martyr, which he is to Catholicism, of course, himself burned people at the stake for heresy. So he was certainly not blameless where that is concerned. But one must admire his principles, his firm convictions and his principles, and willing to die upholding to the end his belief that the king did not have the authority to govern the church in England, and he was not the supreme head of the church, and that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was not null and void. Even Princess Mary was put in a position where she ended up having to swear, which of course she later renounced, and quite openly, in a rather vivid manner, and of course turned around and persecuted people for their Protestant faith. Some almost 300 people burned at the stake at Smithfield for upholding their principles. What were they supposed to do? Well, look at the case of Thomas Cranmer, who recanted and then recanted his recantation, which is interesting. There's a struggle of the soul. A man who, on the one hand, gave in and was weak, and then at some point his conscience, I guess, gripped him, and he found the strength and courage of his convictions to endure the flames. And as the story goes, he's supposedly stuck the hand which had signed the recantation first into the fire ahead of anything else. Way of saying, almost like bad hand, you signed the recantation, you were wrong to do so. But the point is this: you have a situation where you have forced religion, where you have people saying, okay, you must belong to this religion, and if you do not belong to this religion, we will kill you. And Thomas Jefferson cites the results, he cites the examples of so many people dying. What is it he said? Let me read that again. Or repeat what it said again. Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burned, tortured, fined, imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity. So in the interest of uniformity, and making all belong to the same faith, all belong to the same church, the same creed, people have been burnt at the stake, in some cases drowned. In the case of the Anabaptists, they love to drown them. They love to drown the Anabaptists in mockery of the rebaptism which gave them their name. Because another term for Anabaptists was rebaptizers, because they believed in adult baptism instead of infant baptism. So you have a situation there where people are being tortured, killed, punished, persecuted, and so forth. Why? Because they disagreed with somebody in power. Now, whether or not you agree with the particular church, whether or not you agree with a particular creed, nobody has the right to burn somebody at the stake, or to torture them, or to arrest them, or to kill them in any other way or maim them in any other way simply because of what they believe. That is why we have the free exercise clause in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So, you have, for example, the case of Michael Servetus. Now, agree or disagree with Michael Servetus, that's not the point. Michael Servetus was burnt at the stake for denying the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, historically, Christians, in terms of Christianity, the doctrine of the Trinity is a vital part of Christian doctrine. It is a vital part of Pauline established historical biblical Christianity as known and accepted by the vast majority of Christians throughout history. But Michael Servetus apparently denied this. He denied the doctrine. So, say what you will about Michael Servetus, about the condition of his soul, and whether or not he was right to do so. The point here is that he was burnt at the stake on the orders of John Calvin, interestingly enough, in Geneva for denying the doctrine of the Trinity. So you have this kind of persecution which is repeated throughout history. And Thomas Jefferson is essentially making the point that, hey, you believe in what you believe. If you believe that firmly, if you are convinced of what you are saying, you don't need the state to back you up. You don't need the state to reinforce what you say. If you have the truth on your side, why do you need force? Why do you need to punish people? And even now, of course, you have countries like Iran where you have people being punished, like the one pastor in Iran who's being held in prison for affirming Christian belief. You have people in Egypt who are being punished, being persecuted for affirming the Coptic Christian faith, the Coptic sect of Christianity. And because they have not embraced Islam, they do not embrace Islam, they deny and reject Islam. And for that reason, they are being persecuted. They are being harassed. They are being, in this case, in many cases, it's pretty much unofficial. But this has been the case with the Copts in Egypt. They have had a lot of suffering at the hands of their neighbors, simply because they are Christians instead of Muslims. And but anyway, then we continue. See what else is there.